Listen up, though. There's never enough time to do all the things you don't really want to do anyway. And people are going around stressing out like crazy because they're late for a meeting that they wouldn't have unless somebody was paying them to be there. It's not in their genius zone. And I honor and recognize that a lot of people are in jobs where they don't have a lot of room to develop their genius. But I tell people here all the time, start with 10 minutes. Everybody can afford 10 minutes to dedicate to your genius every day. And write it down in your calendar at first, because if you don't, you'll forget about it. Because genius needs to be nurtured. It's like an inner child. It really needs to be fed and honored and saluted and appreciated.
Happy 2025, Ambitious Introverts, and welcome back to the first podcast of the year. And what an amazing episode I have for you, because I had the pleasure of interviewing the amazing Gay Hendricks. Now, I know many of you will be familiar with Gay's work, especially through his book, The Big Leap. But if you've never heard of him, allow me to introduce him. He is a globally recognized expert in areas of personal growth, relationships, body-mind therapies, and leadership. He began his career as a professor at Stanford, and he has decades of experience coaching executives and leaders. He's authored numerous best-selling books, including The Big Leap, and in the episode, he talks about how at one point he was writing one book a year, which is no mean feat. He's also the founder of the Hendricks Institute and the Foundation for Conscious Living, which are both there to empower individuals to unlock their potential and live in their zone of genius. Now, it was such a pleasure to have a legend like Gay on the podcast, because so much of his work has impacted so much of my work. And terms like zone of genius, upper limit problem that I use in day-to-day conversation come from Gay's work. So it was really an honor to be able to chat with him and let him know how much that's had an impact on me and my clients also. So during the episode, we talk about how to identify and operate in your zone of genius, which helps you to create the most meaningful impact in the world. We discuss the upper limit problem and how our unconscious beliefs can sometimes sabotage our success. Gay shares about how he has reframed the concept of time, which has caused him far less stress. He talks about how simplifying your daily habits can help your productivity, which, of course, we talk about all the time here, on how to own your energy. And like every guest, he shares one way that he owns his energy to make sure that he can keep performing at his best. Now, this episode is going to be a game changer for anyone that wants to create more impact, more joy, more balance in life. And the cherry on the top of this really is that, as we were chatting, Gay shared that he is an ambitious introvert and resonates so hard with the brand. So it's not just tools, tips, it's actually inspiration to see what's possible for ambitious introverts too. So this was a joy to record. Gay's wisdom and experience just flows out of him. So it made it the easiest interview as a host. I didn't really need to even think about questions or pull things out because he just shared so openly and generously. So please, I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it, and soak up all of the goodness from the amazing Gay Hendricks. Gay Hendricks, welcome to the Ambitious Introvert podcast. This is a delight to have you here. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Emma.
I'm going to share a little kind of synchronous, serendipitous story here. When I was a kid, well, not just when I was a kid, I still do read a lot. I read 2 or 3 books a week. And as a child, same thing. So we would have to move libraries every so often to, because I'd have read the whole children's section. And I remember being a young teen and being at a new library, and they had a book on a stand that I was really drawn to. And they said, oh, you can't take that out because that's an adult book. Not like an adult book, but your card doesn't allow that. And I was really drawn to this book and I didn't know why. And I got to read it many years later, and it was Chicken Soup for the Soul, which was co-authored by Jack Canfield. Now, you have co-authored a book with Jack Canfield.
Yes, he's an old friend of mine. We go back way into the 70s. As a matter of fact, I helped him get his first book published. I just published my first book in 1975, around there, and the publisher sent me a copy of one of his first book called something like 100 Ways to Raise Self-Concept in the Classroom. And at the time, he was in education. And I said to the editor, this is going to be a classic. Yes, by all means, publish it. And that was my introduction to Jack Canfield. And he and I lived not too far from each other. We used to live just a few miles from each other, but now we've moved over here about 40 minutes outside of Santa Barbara, where he lives.
Well, Jack's been a huge inspiration to me in the personal development field since literally my late teens when I read that book. And the book you and he wrote was about books. How very meta, was about the book, the one book that you would recommend to someone. Now, for the first 140 episodes of this podcast, I asked every guest a question, and I asked them, what is one book you would recommend to other ambitious introverts? And do you know what the most recommended book was?
Nope.
The Big Leap.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm touched by that. That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for telling me that.
So we've kind of come full circle from me wanting to read Chicken Soup for the Soul to being here talking to you today. And that's actually how I found out about you. One of my guests, who is a friend of mine, Dr. Wendy O'Connor, she's also got her PhD from Stanford in psychology, and she recommended it. It was her book recommendation. So I went and read it. I was like, this is amazing. And then people just kept coming on and they kept going, the Big Leap, the Big Leap. So you've definitely had an impact in the entrepreneurial field.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So the thing that is your zone of genius, and we're going to go a little bit further into this, is being able to explain things in a way that is simple, but people can implement it and make massive change in their life. I think for me, that's why the Big Leap is so digestible and inspirational, because you've given us a language that we can all recognize. You've given us things like zone of genius, zone of excellence. You've given us upper limit problem. And we see that. It's very clear. It's very yes or no as to whether we're experiencing an upper limit problem. It's very yes or no as to whether we're in a zone of genius. How did these concepts come about to you? How did you discover them within yourself?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. It goes back a long way for me, because I started noticing, like, take, for example, the upper limit problem, which is that tendency to sabotage ourselves when things start going better, or to keep ourselves trapped doing things we don't like to do, but think we have to do. And so I first noticed it in myself, even before I had a word to call it. I was way back in the 70s, or actually maybe it was 1969, I was obese and I was losing weight, and I lost 35 pounds and I felt great. And I was walking down the street on my way to a bookstore, and I saw some people in an ice cream shop eating this big, messy ice cream sundae with bananas and everything in it. And I just completely lost it. And I went in and I ordered one, and I ate it. And for about 20 minutes, I felt like the king of the universe when all that sugar was pouring through me. But 20 minutes after that, it was like somebody punched me in the stomach. I got the worst stomach ache I'd ever had. And I was literally doubled over on the street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when this struck me. And I realized, why would I go from feeling so great to feeling so awful? What would cause me to do that? And that's when I started discovering that I and a lot of other people have unconscious limiting beliefs. Like there's some I talk about in The Big Leap, which a lot of people have. Like a lot of people have an unconscious limiting belief that they don't deserve the good things of life. That for some reason, because of something they did, or because of their, who they are, or the color of their skin, or their height, or their gender, or whatever, they feel like they don't have a right to have the good things of life. And that belief will really keep you stuck. And so if you're watching or listening to this, look inside and see if you have any of these that I'm talking about. Like another one that I run into all the time, even with fairly successful people, is a fear of being in the light. In other words, a fear of being in the spotlight yourself. You feel okay about supporting other people that are in the spotlight, but as far as being the star of your own life, you don't feel like you're able to do that. And a lot of these limiting beliefs happen really early in life. Like the spotlight one. A lot of people have told me that they grew up in a family where there was a kind of a golden boy or golden girl, like the oldest son or the oldest daughter who was the star, and then everybody else wasn't. My wife actually grew up in a family like that. Her brother was the clear star, her older brother, and the other two kids were there, but they didn't get quite the fanfare that number one got. And I've actually seen it myself on a number of occasions while they were still alive. So when that happens, you often get the sense that you're not destined to be in the light. You're destined to be over near the light, but supporting somebody that's more in the light. But one of my missions is to tell everybody that it's your turn right now. Go ahead. Own it. Take full agency over your life. Because, like I always say, unless you're clear about what the purpose of your life is, you're serving somebody else's purpose. And that's not a good thing to do, because if you don't honor that part of yourself that's trying to break through and make a difference in the world and in your life, if you sit on that, it really makes you unhappy first, and then later on it can actually make you sick. There's a great quotation from the Gospel of Thomas that says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. That we all have these things we need to bring forth in ourselves. For me, I call it your genius. It's what you're here for. It's what you're supposed to be doing while you're on your brief transit through this planet.
The genius term, I think, is especially for high achievers and very ambitious people who listen to this podcast. Many, many people, myself included, get stuck in the zone of excellence. And I was in my zone of excellence for many years. I spent 17 years as an air traffic controller here in London, and that's a job that not many people have the aptitude to do. We're told it's the most stressful job in the world. For every 1,000 people that apply, only one person qualifies. So that kind of makes you think, oh, I'm in my genius because I'm doing this thing that not many people can do. But it took me about 15 years to go, oh yeah, I can do this, but I don't think it's actually my genius. I didn't have the words for it then. I hadn't discovered your work. And when I left that to pursue, growing a coaching business, people thought I was nuts. They thought I was crazy. They're like, you're never going to earn this much money. What are you doing? This is a job for all of this. Like, it can be really hard. And I see why many people get stuck in that zone of excellence.
Yes. Well, I don't label it as hard. I just think it takes a lot of attention. That it's like that example I use of the automatic pilot on an airplane. The pilot sets the parameters into the automatic pilot, and then it flies off and it does this amazing thing many, many times a minute where it says, okay, we're drifting a little to the right. Let's correct to the left. Okay, we're drifting a little to the left. Let's correct to the right. So it has a program that's all about recommitment. And the way I say it is you can get all the way from New York to Honolulu by being wrong most of the time, because you're always in the process of recorrecting and homing back in on the beam. And that beam is your genius. That beam that's calling to you is what you most love to do and what makes your biggest contribution to the world around you.
There's a great story in the book about a lady who is doing her role at work, but she keeps being given, like, oh, can you do this? Can you plan this event? Can you plan this meeting? Because people have realized that she's good at doing it. And then you said after a while, she's like, but I don't actually like doing it. There are other people that could do it. Why do people keep asking me to do it? We can so often get pigeonholed by what other people think we are good at and just end up on this train of like doing.
Yeah, I personally experienced that. When I was a university professor, I wrote a book every year. That was just what I did, and I have done so since 1975. I've written a book every year that was about whatever the new thing I had learned that year. And but since I was a good writer, every time a piece of writing needed to be done for the department, everybody would turn to me and say, "Gay, would you mind knocking out this 3-pager on?" And I did it a bunch of times. Finally, I threw a rebellion, though, because I said, look, I may be a genius at writing my own books, but I'm not a genius at writing something to the Department of Education in Washington asking for a grant. That's in my zone of excellence. I think a lot of people get trapped, though, in their zone of excellence for that very reason, because people start depending on them and relying on them. And that's a good feeling in a way. It's a good feeling to be able to meet other people's needs. I grew up my mother was a newspaper columnist and terrific writer. And people were always after her to write other things. And they often, like in 1957, I remember her just going bananas because they asked her to write this piece on the history of Leesburg, Florida for our centennial. It had been 100 years since the town was founded. So they asked my mother to do it, and she said yes. And then they said, well, we'd like you to make as a contribution. I mean, this was a big 2,500 word piece, and my mother said, okay. But at home, she would be blowing her stack every night to me and my brother because she didn't want to be doing this. And, a lot of us get lost in that dutiful zone where we're always wanting to please other people. And my mother took it out to the extreme because later she ran for mayor and won. And so from then on, it wasn't everybody that just wanted her to write things. It was her to fix the potholes and things like that. So she created a life of constant sort of incredible busyness all the time, which is something I've gone to the other extreme. I consider being busy a sign of deteriorating mental health. And so I do my best never to be in a hurry.
There is, actually, I wasn't going to touch on this, but now that we're here, you talk about time in the book. And you talk about Einstein time. And I think this, we can't not mention it now that you've just said that. This idea of being busy and feeling busy. We all come across these people where they're on the go, they're busy, they can't stop. There's so much to do and they've got this kind of hurried energy. And then you talk about the people as well that are always late, that person that we all know that's consistently late. And what is the difference between what's going on? Because time is time. And the difference is that time comes from within us, you say.
Yes. If you own time, if you choose to be the source of where time comes from, it takes you out of the conflict relationship with time. Many people operate in a tremendous conflict with time because one thing is they think there's not enough of it. I can remember so many times my mother, her favorite phrase, usually offered at high volume, was, there simply are not enough hours in the day. And so she was frantically busy, single parent to 2 boys at a time when it wasn't very popular to be a single parent. And she'd lost her husband at age 32. And so she had to go at her own. And when my father died, she was a happy housewife. When he died, she found like she was a housewife with $300 in the bank and a car that wasn't paid for. And so she had to invent a whole new life. And she did a magnificent job of first becoming a newspaper columnist and then rising to the mayor's job.
And this concept of, like you say, you don't want to be busy. you don't want to be rushing around. You have taken that conscious decision that you want your life to feel spacious, and therefore you have a spacious life.
That's exactly right, because we can make up exactly as much time as we need to do the things we love to do. Listen up, though. There's never enough time to do all the things you don't really want to do anyway. And people are going around stressing out like crazy because they're late for a meeting that they wouldn't have unless somebody was paying them to be there. It's not in their genius zone. And I honor and recognize that a lot of people are in jobs where they don't have a lot of room to develop their genius. But I tell people here all the time, start with 10 minutes. Everybody can afford 10 minutes to dedicate to your genius every day. And write it down in your calendar at first, because if you don't, you'll forget about it. Because genius needs to be nurtured. It's like an inner child. It really needs to be fed and honored and saluted and appreciated. And a lot of people get actually punished for their genius. In other words, they come up with a wild and crazy idea and everybody laughs at them and everything like that. It's happened to me on a number of occasions, especially when I was a university professor. University professors are really good at laughing and belittling other people's ideas. It's in their genius zone. And in fact, it ought to be in the job description. Must be willing to humiliate other professors by tearing their work apart. But getting feedback is a good thing. But feedback doesn't need to attack the beingness of the person. Mm-hmm. That's the difference between punitive feedback and useful feedback. Useful feedback is saying to your 4-year-old, your laces are untied again. It's not saying, oh, why do you always go around with your laces untied? That's an attack on the person's beingness. So, we need to keep our minds focused on getting our laces tied, really owning our own well-being. And a lot of that does have to do with time because, if you just go out and listen, I used to listen when I traveled more. I would go into the airport bookstore and listen to the conversations that were going on around me, or I would go into the little gift shop and just wherever it was crowded, I like to listen to what people were actually talking about. And I challenge you to go do this and listen. And when people are talking about time, they talk about it from a victim position, like there's not enough of it. Oh gosh, I'd love to talk to you, but I got to run. Well, that's not true. If you wanted to talk to the person, if your child was there and your child was bleeding and you had a plane to catch, you wouldn't say, listen, I appreciate that you're bleeding, but somebody else is going to have to handle that. I got a plane to catch. And so time is always malleable. And if you get stuck in thinking it's out there and you're a victim of it, boy, can it make life miserable because you'll go back and forth between never having enough of it and having too much of it. You'll be bored some of the time. So then people that are busy all the time get incredibly bored very quickly. And so I recommend that we get a better relationship with time, but not so much focused on time itself, but focused on the cultivation of your genius, because as you cultivate your genius, your time will take care of itself because you'll want to spend more and more time in your genius zone, and you'll take responsibility for organizing your life that way. When I first started focusing on this, Emma, I was only spending less than an hour of my 9-hour workday in my genius zone. And I was the guy that figured it out, That was really embarrassing, And so I realized, gosh, I've got to really improve here if I'm going to start talking about that with my clients and people. So I've set my attention on getting to 3 hours out of the 9 hours. And I just started building it up 10 minutes at a time. And it didn't happen overnight. I want to make that really clear. I had to focus on it for a couple of years to get up to that 3 hour point. But there's a big difference in spending a third of your time in your genius zone and 1/9 of your time, And so then I got bold and I set half. I want to be half. Then I got really bold and set 70%. So within a few years, I kept bumping it up. This is in the 1980s I'm talking about. So I finally went really bold. I said, by the end of the century, 1999, rolling over into 2000, I want to be living and working entirely in my genius zone. And that took a lot of yes, but it also took a lot of no. Because finding your genius zone, you got to say yes to a lot of things, what you love to do, but you got to become a master of saying no to the things that are not in your genius zone. And I'll tell you, a bunch of people that have difficulty saying no, introverts, that's even ambitious introverts
Yes.
have a difficult time saying no. You've probably seen that in your own history. I'm believe it or not, I'm one of those ambitious introverts myself. I never had heard of the term before, but I've always been an introvert. For me, if I have to choose, I'm glad I've been on shows like Oprah, in front of 10 million people and stuff like that. But to this day, if I have to choose between going on a talk show or giving a big talk or going in a room by myself and writing for 3 hours, guess which I'm going to choose? So I've had to kind of build a life where I was comfortable going on Oprah or 500 other shows that we've been on, or even doing this. Like when I wrote my first book, I wrote it on a borrowed typewriter. 1973, I was still a starving graduate student. And when it came out in 1975, it turned out to be a nice little hit. It was a book called The Centering Book. It was about activities to help get children centered in the classroom. And I'd been spending a lot of time in my daughter's classroom when she was in kindergarten in the first grade. She went to school there on the Stanford campus at the school that's kind of run by the campus. It's an experimental school. And she was lucky enough to go to school there. So I was in and out of her classroom all the time. And I noticed that the teacher took forever to get the kids back reorganized after recess or after lunch, or she spent half her time being a wrangler rather than a teacher. So I wrote this little book with a whole bunch of ways of getting kids centered very quickly. And it took off and became a nice little bestseller, sold 50 or 60,000 copies, which I totally was not expecting. Because like I said, when I wrote it, I was still a graduate student living on $300 a month. A lot of peanut butter and crackers. The starving graduate student's friend is the giant $3.79 jar of peanut butter at the time that I could get. So I really, I got invited to give my first talk that was based on the book. Wow. And they were going to pay me $150 for it. And all I had to do was fly from Colorado, where I was at the university, to Kansas City and give a 1-hour talk and fly back. And they were going to pay me. I mean, they were going to pay for the ticket and all that kind of stuff. And wow, $150 for just talking for an hour? That was revelatory for me. So anyway, I go and I give this talk to this little education conference that had about maybe 150 people in the audience. And a guy came up to me afterwards and he wanted me to sign his book, and I did. And he said, I really liked your talk. It wasn't what you said, but it was how you said it that made such a difference for me. And I kind of lit up like a Christmas tree. And I said, oh, well, what was it about it? How? And he said, well, your voice shakes just as badly as mine does when I try to speak in public. And so that was my first piece of feedback. So as you can tell, my voice isn't shaking anymore. So, that was 45 years ago. So I've learned a lot since then. In fact, I'll give this as a gift to listeners. Whenever you find a fault in yourself or somebody calls attention to it, I say, don't try to hide it. I say, paint it red and put it on the top of your head so people can see it. So oddly enough, I got invited a week or two later to fly to Berkeley, California, and give another speech to another education conference. And I basically gave the same talk and got a standing ovation afterwards. And how I started the talk was, I said, I'm nervously standing in front of you right now. And I told the story of what had happened a week or two before in Kansas City. And the audience just roared with laughter. And from then on, it didn't matter what my voice sounded like. Interestingly enough, once I told the story, the shaky part of my voice disappeared, which I think is really a good truth for life, that instead of being committed to concealing ourselves, we need to make a commitment to revealing ourselves. And that's one of the main points behind my book with Katie, our book on relationships called Conscious Loving, and the other book that's for midlife relationships called Conscious Loving Ever After, that they're all about bringing forth the real you and learning how to be absolutely honest and gentle with your honesty so that you're not using your honesty as a blunt instrument, a blunt weapon, so that it's possible to say, I'm scared or I'm angry in the same tone of voice as you say, it's 10 to 11. You don't have to say, I'm angry. It doesn't require emotional explosion. And so once you learn that all your feelings are okay and that you're the source of them, it becomes much easier just to talk about your emotions in a very straightforward way.
That's something I know myself and many of my clients have felt that, our feelings aren't valid, or that certain feelings are bad, so we can't discuss them. Or, like you say, they have a charge about them. You think if you're angry, you're going to be, blowing your head off and getting irate. But actually, I think what coaching, therapy, personal development has done really well is given us that space to be able to just talk about things and kind of neutralize them, and to say, it's okay, I feel angry. Well, let's sit with this anger, or let's discuss this anger, rather than it controlling us.
Really true. And as I've studied people all over the world, I guess Katie and I have, I think between us, racked up more than 2 million frequent flyer miles now. And it doesn't matter whether we're in Calcutta or Beverly Hills or the Bronx or Berlin, people have the same kind of issues. And that's one of the things that inspired me to write The Big Leap, because I went to cultures that I didn't know anything about and found that they had an upper limit problem even built into their language. Like if you go to Sweden, I've done workshops in Stockholm and places in Sweden. One of the first words you'll learn over there is lagom. And lagom means don't be too much, don't be too little. Just stay with the pack. And it's a kind of a culture where there's a lot of attention paid to that issue. If you go to Australia, one of the first things you'll learn if you're in the transformational world is the tall poppy syndrome. They say, don't be the tall poppy. Don't stand out above the crowd. Because 200 years ago, a lot of the people that came to Australia came there in chains. They were prisoners. And that was where England sent their prisoners.
They departed from Portsmouth, where I live. They departed from the harbour just down the road.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. I think I remember riding through Portsmouth back in 1983 or something like that on my bicycle. Katie and I did 3 bicycle touring books of Europe, and one of them we rode all over the UK, including Ireland and Wales. And I'll tell you, if you want to learn something about hills, go over to Wales on a bicycle sometime. I felt like an entirely different person after I finished our little 3 or 4 days in Wales, because it was like this the entire time.
I can
Maybe other
imagine.
parts of England are that way too, but I've been to Scotland and other places, and they have lots of rolling hills there, but not so much those up and down things that they have in Wales. The people, though, were absolutely wonderful once I learned to understand what they were saying. It was a real challenge cutting through those accents sometimes.
The accents can be very challenging even for us. Even if I meet people from parts of Wales or Scotland, it can still be quite like, sorry, just say that again.
Oh, Scotland's a whole different story. I remember the first time we went to Scotland, we were trying to find a bed and breakfast, and the woman was giving us directions to this place, which was only a couple of blocks away. And she kept using this term, turn left at the grassy area. And I kept saying, grassy area? What is a grassy area? And it turned out that that's Scottish for a grassy area. But I must have asked her an embarrassingly number of times to repeat that, please. And finally said, could you actually write that out for me? And I said, oh, okay. But it speaks to the issue of all human beings, which is, learning how to communicate with each other in a way where the other person really gets it. And some people, I was trying to cross the border one time from Nepal into India, and there was this fellow in front of me that was having some problem with his visa. And his solution to the problem, the other guy didn't speak really good English. He was a Nepali guy, and he didn't speak really great English. But the English-speaking guy's solution was to speak louder and start beating on the table as if speaking louder. It's like Wayne Dyer says, most of us spend our time doing more and more of what already doesn't work. And I believe that now.
I think that is something that English speakers do, unfortunately. I'll just say it louder and I'll say it slower and I'll get a little bit annoyed. And then surely they'll just suddenly magically understand me. So before we wrap up, I think I would love you to share with us how, if someone's listening and they're like, I just don't know what my genius zone is. I'm not sure I found it. I don't know how to find it. I honestly don't know where to start, other than obviously reading the book. How can people really start to feel into what their genius might be?
Well, first of all, may I give a shameless plug
Please
for my latest book called Your Big Leap Year.
I saw this on Amazon.
Yes, it's 366 different days, including one for leap years, 366 little bite-sized things you can do every day. And let me give you a free one to start out with. Go in a room by yourself and put your timer on for 10 minutes. And for 10 minutes, only do the following thing, because this is the same thing I have fancy executives, multi-jillionaires here do when they come for a day of coaching with me. Everybody does the same, which you go in a little room by yourself, and for 10 minutes, all you do is in your mind, you say, or you could do it out loud, you say, what do I most love to do? And then after you say that in your mind, take 3 soft, easy breaths. So give yourself a little space after you ask the question. Take 3 soft, easy breaths. Then repeat it. What is it that I most love to do? So you're not looking for the answer, to grab an answer right away. You're looking to float the question. I remember in Einstein's notebooks, he wondered about a particular problem in physics every day for 27 years before he figured it out. So he lived in this state of wondering every day about a particular thing, I mean, sure, he should probably do that about 58 different things, but there was one thing he couldn't figure out for 27 years. And then apparently walking on the beach over here in Santa Barbara, 20 miles from where I'm talking right now, he apparently figured something out. Interestingly enough, he wasn't in the lab, he was walking on the beach. And so I want to put in a giant plug as we wrap up for the state of wonder, opening up and purely wondering without needing the right answer. It's a gift to yourself because the moment you wonder, you go from the zone of the known out into the zone of the unknown. You don't know, you're wondering. And that's pure creativity in action. So go in a little room. What do I most love to do? Until that buzzer goes off at the end of 10 minutes, okay? I have people all the time, like even big executives, come out and say, that changed my life, and some people say, that's all I need. It's 10 minutes past 9, but I'm ready to go home now. I've signed up
I've got it.
from 9 till, I've got it, And so we say, no, let's stay. We can make some other use of that. Let's stay till 5:30 like you made a deal for. So, but what I'm getting at is taking yourself out of the zone of what you know and just treating yourself to some pure wonder. What would I like for lunch tomorrow? Actually, my wife, Katie, in addition to being able to walk on the stage at Oprah and talk for an hour or write books, she's co-authored 12 books with me. She's a fabulous chef. And she can cook really great, all sorts of things, but she loves things like Indian food and Thai food and things like that. But one of the things she asks me probably 5 times a week is, what would you like for lunch tomorrow? Because we usually eat only one meal a day. Like we don't eat dinner, for example. We eat a kind of a big lunch. But then at dinner, we might have a little snack or a piece of fruit or something like that. But I feel better if I don't eat a bunch of food at night. I wake up feeling great the next day. Whereas if I have to go out for a banquet or something and stuff myself at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, I feel the next day, So anyway, Katie will ask me, what would you like for lunch? Sometimes I get something right away. Like there are certain dishes that she makes which are really fabulous. One is quesadillas, which is a kind of a melted cheese on a tortilla with finely chopped up tomato, chili, and onions. It's called pico de gallo in a Mexican restaurant. So that's a standard one meal. Or an Indian soup called dal, which is made out of dal. Oh, God, I love dal. I could live on it. In fact, I once was in India for a month where I ate only Indian food, and I lost 15 pounds for starters, which was great at the time because I was a little overweight when I went there. But I felt healthy the entire time. I was just, eating, and that's where I got on eating one big meal a day because I was at an ashram where they served a big lunch, but then like 4 or 5 in the afternoon, you'd have some tea, something like that. Or maybe sometimes a little slice of cake. But there was never any heavy meal at night. And I was feeling so good the whole time I was in India that I kind of started doing that. And so if you're ready to give up dinner, try that for a few days. And just try eating a nice substantial lunch and having a little bit of food at night and feel how you feel the next day. I feel so much better than if I tax myself down with a bunch of food. And also, for some strange reason, alcohol about 10 years ago, especially with wine, stopped tasting good to me. I used to like a glass of wine if I were out for dinner. I can't do it anymore. Like sometimes I'll take one sip of my wife's glass of wine, but I find that if I drink alcohol, and I've never been a big drinker, I never drink more than a glass of wine or a half a beer or something like that, but I've never cared for stronger alcohol. But even that one little bit of alcohol was kind of messing my mind up a little bit, and I wake up feeling a little muddy the next day. So anyway, listen to old Preacher Hendricks here. Eat one meal a day and take it easy on the alcohol and other indulgences too. But I find that the daily expression of genius is the best intoxicant on earth, because it intoxicates you in the right way. You feel good, like I feel great today. I'm almost 80 years old and I feel just as good as I felt, 20 or 30 years ago, maybe even better in a way. But I think we just need to keep feeding our genius and let the rest take care of itself.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. Thank you for taking the time to share all of your experience and your wisdom with us. I'm going to link both of the books because this is probably December or January now when this is live and people are listening. So it's the perfect time to get the new book. But before we wrap up, I would love to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests, especially now that we know you're an introvert too. What is one daily practice or ritual that you have that helps you to own your energy so you know you can keep performing at your best?
I want to give a big plug for meditation because I discovered meditation when I was an insanely busy graduate student. And at the time, I was a single parent because my wife and I had split up and she had left for Europe. And I was taking care of my daughter, who was 5 and 6 years old that year. And so I was crazy busy with Stanford and all the stuff that I had to do there, plus being a single parent. And I learned how to meditate. I took the TM training and I started doing it 20 minutes twice a day. And that changed my life because for 20 minutes twice a day, I'd sort of drop out of that world of craziness and open up a space of genuine serenity in my mind. And I'd never really felt that before. You know, my mind up until I learned to meditate was sort of like a traffic jam up there honking and that kind of thing. But once I learned to clear that space that just a little bit of meditation does, and I've done it every day since. I haven't missed a day in 52 years now.
Wow.
And so I really highly want to recommend some kind, it doesn't have to be that particular kind of practice, but something that allows you to really get at ease with yourself for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, or in my case, 40 minutes a day, where you really just be with yourself. And the more you do that, the more you own yourself. You know, you realize, oh, I can make up the amount of time I need to do certain things, or I can do what I love to do. And even if I only can do it for 20 minutes a day, that's better than doing it for 5 minutes a day. So, you know, gradually learning how to think more positively about how you experience your time.
I'm sorry, my cat is shouting in the background. She's obviously enjoying everything that you've got to say here. So I'm sorry if you could hear her there. But that is...
I'm looking over here to see if my cat is where she usually is. No, I guess she's not there. She was here to start with. My cat likes to sit over beyond here on a little cushion and listen to me.
Oh, that's nice. Mine doesn't like listening. She likes to join in, unfortunately. But anyway, thank you so much. That's such a great recommendation. And the thing I love particularly when people mention meditation is that it is free and it is accessible for anyone to do at any time of day. So I love that you have shared with us something that anyone can give a go.
Well, good. Well, nice talking to you. And this must be European Day for me because at 11:30 today, my time, I'm doing a talk with a bunch of European students who study our work. And so they get together and every month they have a little meeting. And sometimes I like to go and talk to them. And they're a really great group because they've all, studied our books and everything. So they're really a elevated group to talk to. So I'm going to do that today.
Well, I'm glad I got to kick off your European Day. And thank you once again. It was an absolute pleasure.
All right. And have a bite of clotted cream for me in Southern England.
Will do. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. I hope that you're feeling expanded to what's possible for you, motivated to take action, and inspired about how you can start to own your energy. I share even more tools and resources on my Introverts Only email newsletter. By signing up, you not only get early access to the Ambitious Introvert products and services, but you also get brand new podcast episodes delivered straight to your inbox every Monday, meaning you'll never miss your weekly dose of introvert-friendly inspiration. Sign up now at theambitiousintrovert.com/newsletter or click the link in the show notes. See you next week.